The reassembly begins with the centre wheel, and just before I begin the reassembly, I am just going to make a note of the fact that this movement has been washed about 5 times, because despite the fact that it looked clean and despite the fact that all of the pivot points and everything looked pretty dry, and I was surprised to not see any build-up of rubbish and what have you, as is common when you strip these movements that haven't been looked at in a while. It transpires that this had actually been cleaned, in inverted commas, in one of the Duncan Swish clean and lubricate all-in-one wash and go. You know, spend time taking Mobius oils into the shower? Not me, I just wash and go, etc. It's hideous stuff. It's hideous stuff. It's the worst stuff imaginable. It essentially leaves a coating of oily gunk all over everything, but it's, in this case, I've not actually come across one quite like this before. In this case, this in fact dried. It had a dry coating everywhere. When it came out of the wash the first time around, I thought something was amiss with, I thought I'd not given it enough drying time because there were droplets visible on some of the parts. And even though I'd run it at a normal cycle, I thought maybe I've not given it enough drying time. And so I ran it through the dryer again for a little bit longer, and to still see these droplets. And then I had a poke about at these droplets to discover that they were oil, or oily rather. So it then had a wash in isopropyl alcohol, everything pretty much. And then it went through the machine again, and it came out a second time with still these droplets on. So then it had another wash and another clean. It took several. I might now have contaminated my cleaning fluids, which is incredibly frustrating because I only changed those 2 movements ago. And for all of those who know, you know, these cleaning fluids are not cheap things when you're filling cleaning fluid jars with them for a cleaning machine. So that's my little gripe about this. And whoever had this movement prior to me and lubricated it with said lubricant, I sincerely hope that they stand in a puddle of dog urine wearing socks. It's horrendous stuff. Horrendous. I got word from a very, very knowledgeable fella who's been in the trade for years, who I happen to know through one of the groups. A lovely fellow by the name of Simon, who was telling me about a stuff called what was it called? The name will come to me shortly, but essentially this one-shot solution stuff. And the way he describes it, it sounds to me exactly like this. It dries everywhere but the jewel holes, seemingly, which is precisely what this one did. So I highly suspect, Solo Lube it was called, that's it. I highly suspect that that's what was on this. Horrible, horrible stuff. I cannot stress enough how horrendous it is. It truly, truly is. As you can see here, the mainspring barrel's been reassembled. This is the drive wheel. This is upside down at the moment, incidentally. This is the little drive wheel. You can see just turning there for the hour recorder. And this washer at the top, which retains it, you add a little bit of 9010 just underneath the washer on top of the drive wheel, but not underneath the drive wheel where the tension spring is. And that's direct from the Seiko document itself. So we'll pop that in. You'll notice it wheels about all over the place because It doesn't have a bottom arbor hole as yet because that's on the front plate, which goes over the front chronograph works, and then the calendar works build onto that. So next up is the third wheel. These have already been these have all been re-cleaned and dipped and everything as well, so that they're nice and clean. And I'm going to have to run a sacrificial movement through my cleaning machine to see if I'm just getting with my loop here. So there we've got the escape wheel, to see if the cleaning lubricants are in fact contaminated. And both times when the balance came out, the first two times when the balance came out, the hairspring was actually stuck together with the residue, so that had to be dipped and cleaned separately, which you can probably just about see there. Very, very infuriating. Next to be fitted is the chronograph runner. Now, before fitting this needs a small amount of 9010 to be applied between this little step and the gear, the pinion as it were. Let me just try and get that visible for you down here. That's a little bit tricky. You need to get that on a staking block. It's pretty much impossible to show on camera, because to get the camera close enough, you physically then cannot get in to attack it. It's a bit of a nuisance, but again, that's made clear on the Seiko documents, which can be found online, so you can grab a hold of those and take a good look and see exactly what I mean. So to try and give you an idea, you'll see here I've got a small staking block, and then what I need to do is, using a pair of tweezers, is press down gently on the pinion, which compresses the spring at the back and gives a very, very tiny gap at which you can just pop a drop of oil in. I won't be able to do this on screen, unfortunately, because I physically have to get in right up close and look at what I'm doing, and I know that's just going to block the view there. But the Seiko document does explain it and show it very, very well. It goes without saying you have to be very careful when doing this, because these wheels are like unicorn poo. Now they are getting harder and harder to find. They are long out of production, and of course they are the primary component of the chronograph. With a little lubrication added to that, what you can do is grip the pivot and just check that that rotates freely while the pivot remains stationary, which it should. And there's a fibre right there which I need to extricate. So apologies if that was a little blurry and out of focus, but trying to hold that and see what I was doing at the same time. Next up, we fit this wheel, and we need a small amount of 9010 on the shoulder of the pivot. This just then drops into place like so. At which point we can pop the train and barrel bridge on. Now these, the 6139, 6138, are generally very well behaved when it comes to everything lining up when you drop these on. So this one's not quite as easy to check as a 6139, because you don't have the bottom pivot of the mainspring barrel, and so it's a little bit trickier. Now, what you saw me doing just there was a little tip Yeah. What you saw me doing just there was actually a little tip I picked up from... Now then, was that Adrian at VTA, or was it... oh crikey, the other fella whose name I forget, and if it is, I apologise most sincerely, because that's not intentional, and I will find it out and put it on the screen. But there's Adrian at VTA, and there's an Ashton Tracy horologist, both Australian, both very good with the Seikos. Adrian, of course, being the chap that does the jewel sets for the barrel arbor. Ashton Tracy, I think that's who it actually was that had this little tip for getting all the pivots in the 6139, and obviously 6138, because it is much of a muchness, to align. And what you do is, with a little bit of pressure on the top plate, and I do mean a tiny bit of pressure, don't go pressing, you know, don't go leaning on it. Just give the side of your movement holder a few taps, and everything kind of jiggles into place and drops in nicely. Now, I can tell you also that this does not work on all watches equally. I've tried it on a few out of curiosity, since I saw that in one of the videos, and I thought, oh, I'm going to give that a try the next time I'm doing a 6139, and to my surprise and joy, it worked a treat. Although, as I say, these are really not that troublesome anyway. They're kind of very well behaved when it comes to dropping into their pivot holes. So and I have tried it on other movements, and sadly it's not a one trick fits all thing. Didn't work quite so well on some other movements, but a handy one to know, useful. So that's anyone who finds that useful, you may give thanks to Ashton Tracy, horologist, who can be found on YouTube. Has a few very good videos on YouTube, all related to the 6139 and such. So quite happily recommend that you look those up and enjoy them. So I'm going to go ahead and build up the rest of this. I'm not going to film this, because this bit here is essentially exactly the same as the 6139. There really is no difference whatsoever, with the sole exception of these gears, which are for your manual winding. These are riveted in place. There is, if you recall, only one loose one, and that loose one just drops onto its post. These are just lubricated with D5. Very straightforward. Little drop of D5, including the riveted ones. Just get in there with a fine oiler, and that will do its thing. The rest of the build up of this is exactly the same as a 6139. You could have a look at my Seiko Pogue 6139 video to see the procedure for that. If people want to see the full procedure, I do actually have a bullhead that I plan to restore, or that I plan to strip, service, clean and rebuild. Not necessarily restore, because I won't be refinishing the case or doing anything particularly unusual in that respect. And if there's enough demand, then, as it's my own watch and I can take the time it takes to film, I will actually film the entire process, everything including spring removal, refitting and the whole shebang, if you wish. It's just that I know it will make for a very long video. But in the meantime, I'm going to build up the movement side of this, exactly opposite to how I stripped it down. And then I will be flipping onto the dial side, where I will rejoin you for the fitting of the dial side chronograph components. Now, I could fib to you and tell you that I hadn't forgotten to actually put this intermediate wheel in on its post before putting the cover plate on, but I'm not going to do that. I'd completely forgotten to do that. And of course, at the same time, you've got this other intermediate wheel underneath here, which needs to be lubricated. A little drop of D5 on that post, and then the upper one, which you saw earlier. So apologies for missing on that one, That was just force of habit, me putting the train in and then going straight for the bridge, because I'm so used to, I've done about 3 6139s very recently, and I'm just kind of on autopilot a bit there, so apologies for that, and please don't forget that if you're doing your own. Here we're on the dial side, as you can see, and the keyless works have been refitted. This is straightforward. It's a simple matter of this little lever here, which is all part of the quick day date change, which you'll see momentarily. The yoke, the setting lever, and then the setting lever spring, like a conventional Swiss watch, unlike the 6139, which has the built-in spring tension on the yoke, etc. So this is more like your conventional Swiss watch setup. And then the quick day date change consists of 2 parts. And the first part is this with the driving stars, which move from side to side to alternate to change either the day or the date. On this, I found when I was rotating it, there was some notchiness and grittiness, and this I found was some of the teeth which had been marred. And I suspect, because it does actually wind as it should now. I'm not going to wind it too much because it's not got the pallets or anything in just yet, but you can see there, give it a little wind and it winds just fine. It's as it's supposed to do. And you can see it down here likewise. So you can see that that's working. So the notchiness and grittiness, I suspect, might have actually come from this. Hopefully so. We'll find out for certain when it all gets back together. And what I've done is just using the pointed tips of my tweezers essentially as a burnisher, is I've worked the grooves of these wheels until it's burnished away the scarred metal that's there. And I suspect that this happened through being disassembled previously and perhaps gripped too hard with steel tweezers, and it's just marked, it's maybe slipped and it's marred some of the teeth. That's most likely how that occurred, but hopefully this should sort it out. And the quick day date change, as I say, consists of this part up here, this part down here, which is your guide fork, which slots in between here like so. You'll see that in a moment as I put it on. For lubrication, the Seiko guide suggests or recommends to you that you lubricate the points underneath here, the pivot points, with 9010. It's actually my preference to use D5 because these are parts that are, it sticks better, I think, and these are parts that you are turning by hand to quick set the day and date. They don't get used that frequently, and it's not like it needs a light oil. I prefer to use D5 on this. Doesn't really matter if your preference is to follow the guide, that's absolutely fine. The pivot post up here will have D5 on it. There will be a small amount of D5 on here, on this bit, and you'll see how this all kind of interacts. Now you can assemble this prior to putting the setting lever spring on if you're a masochist. The easier way is to fit the keyless works and the setting lever spring, and then to feed this in afterwards, moving the setting lever spring, which you can't see because I was blocking it there, but the setting lever spring down here, let me try and show you that. There, out of the way to fit this into, and I'll try and get that on video so you can see what I mean. So it'll need a little bit of lubrication up here, which connects with this part. There's a lubrication on the pivot point, lubrication down here on the spring and on here, and obviously the gears will be lubricated prior to going in, and then this bit fits in on here with no lubrication on the fork, because you don't want this sits like this, but you don't want grease to be sort of spreading around the plate and getting places it doesn't need to be. So you don't put any lubrication on that particular part. And following that, we will fit the dial side train, the cannon pinion, minute wheel and hour wheel, and then this little post here which has the intermediate wheel, intermediate driving wheel for the calendar works. Then the chronograph components, the hammer and the brake and all the rest of it, and then the top plate. Once that top plate's on and screwed into place, we can then fit the pallets and we can fit the balance and we can get this running. And then the calendar works are the only thing that's remaining, the actual calendar ring and the day and date changing mechanism which sits on the top up here. What I'm going to do before I put the lubrication in, I'm actually going to show it you just now while it's dry, because that will probably be easier than trying to manhandle it. So I'm using an oiler, an old broken oiler, which I've smoothed the end off. So I'm going to pop that in there. We're going to lever this spring out like so. Then this part is going to slide into that gap there, in between this part that's shaped like a stealth bomber and the spring, like so. It is going to sit on that post like so, and this just moving this up carefully so it drops. Oops. Okay, messed that up already. Actually, it just occurred to me, this goes in easier if I pull this into the time setting position. In the time setting position, obviously, because this part is lower, it will fit easier. So once again, we'll lever this, pop this in here and feed it down, this onto that post, release that spring so it puts the tension on there, and there we have it in place. Once that's in place, obviously lubricated and what have you, this might pop out as I close this, but then I can pop that back up. It's not popped out, but that, once everything's in place, that will sit down there like so, as you can see now. We then have a small plate just here, which sits, if I can grab that, it's going to behave. That sits just there and acts as a cover and holds that in place over the setting lever there and the top of this. And then this guide fork, as mentioned previously, pops into there, and this gives a runner for the quick day date change to pivot across like so. If you remember in the first one, a small pin popped out and dropped onto the mat when I removed this cover plate originally, which looked a little bit like a screw. That pin was this one right here, which is just a press fit into the plate. So that was pressed back into place, and the hammer, the chronograph hammer, actually rests back. It acts as both a guide pin for the top plate to lock it into place, and also a stop, a rest for the hammer for the hour recording wheel. We're back here with the quickset works attached, as you can see, as described previously, the various parts connected, and you can see how they interact, like so. And I'll show you the operation of that in a moment. The sharp-eyed of you out there will have noticed my deliberate mistake in fitting the yoke the wrong way around. I did that to test you. Oh yes. Can you hear the sincerity in my voice? Yes, I messed up on that one. I fitted the yoke the wrong way around, and I realised this on fitting for testing the quick date change. And if the yoke's the wrong way around, it will not work because it won't push the sliding pinion far enough. So if you reassemble this far and the quick day date change doesn't work, that's why the yoke's the wrong way around. So if you are following this along and assembling a 6138, go back to where I fit the yoke and don't fit it like I did in the video. So flip it around. You'll be able to see straight away what I mean. So quick day date change setting, you pull out to the first position like so, and then you'll notice now there's your quick day anti-clockwise, and there's your quick date clockwise, and you can see how that rocks back and forth accordingly using the fork as a guide. And then when you pull out to the time setting, it drops into a neutral position, and you can see there it will still turn, but it's in a neutral position. It's in the middle of both of them, so it won't turn either one, and this will enable you to turn the wheels to set the time on the watch. And then obviously pushed fully in is your hand winding position, as you can see just there. Next things to add are cannon pinion, minute wheel and hour wheel. They will be lubricated with D5 or grease for the cannon pinion, and then D5 and D5 for the minute wheel and hour wheel. The intermediate calendar wheel does not use lubrication. It's a plastic wheel on a metal post. It doesn't require lubrication. Lubrication will actually hinder the performance. If you ever have parts, plastic wheels on a movement, never ever lubricate them. As I say, that will actually hinder the performance. It's not required at all. And then the next step will be the hour recording wheel and the dial side chronograph components. So here we've got the hour recording wheel, and that's lubricated with D5. If in doubt, when it comes to lubrication, high speed, low torque, lighter oil, Mobius 9 to 10, low speed, high torque, a heavier oil like D5. General rule of thumb. Worst case scenario, if something's not right and you find out it adversely affects the performance, you can always take it out, clean it and do it again. But a lot of the time, before technical documents were readily available, before the internet made these things readily available, quite a lot of lubrication was kind of winging it, and if you just use that general rule of thumb, it works pretty well. So put the hour wheel in place like so. Make sure that the chronograph is in the run position, and the same goes for when you're assembling the back. So as you're assembling it, it should be in the run position. This is again fairly standard practice for all chronographs. They ideally need to be in the run position when assembling the components. So we've fitted the hour wheel, lubricated the lower pivot with D5. Next we're going to fit the brake and this operating fork, which has the long pinion on the other side. And this engages with the levers, the chronograph levers on the back that open and close and clamp the chronograph wheel. And this is what frees and what locks and releases the hour recording wheel here. When the hour recording wheel is locked by the brake, this part of the barrel arbor won't turn and move it. And the rest of the barrel will continue to turn because it's on a slipping spring. When it's unlocked, then there's less friction on this than there is on this, so this will actually rotate it. And it's a slow rotation, very minimal movement. So unless there's very, very excessive wear on this part here of the barrel, it won't have a problem moving it. So a little bit of 9 to 10, tiny bit on the pivot. Doesn't need much because these parts are not actually moving very far or doing a great deal. So you've got your brake which sits on here like so, and you can see how minimal that movement is. Very, very small, very small. I'm going to put a small amount of D5 at the bottom of that where the two parts will interact, and a tiny spot of grease, Mobius 8300. Just on here, where this lever the next bit is the hammer. The face of the hammer is lubricated. Ordinarily, where possible, I will lubricate the hearts of a chronograph. When I lubricate the hearts or the hammer faces of a chronograph, I keep a piece of pegwood which is soaked in grease, H200. I use that to just go over the face of the hammer or the heart, and that is enough lubrication. It gives a light thin coating, and it's enough, but without it being too much. This is essentially a piece of pegwood which is soaked in grease. The excess is wiped off and it is saved specifically for this task. That's all it's used for. So remembering what I said about this post here, which acts as a buffer, and there's a tiny pin underneath this which is difficult to see, but that actually fits in this little slot here. So I'm going to put a little dab of grease, 8300, on that pin. Just a small amount, because you don't want it to go anywhere else. It doesn't need, it ideally does not want to go anywhere else at all. This then fits over this little post like so, and it should fit into the groove so that this is a little bit of a juggle, this bit's just trying to get everything to match up with where it should be going. The trickiest bit of all of this, however, is fitting the spring, the tension spring, which hooks between all these, and that one's a bit of a pig. I'll be quite honest. So, little spot of 9010 on that pivot before we fit the return spring. The return spring, this needs a little bit of lubrication on this face. Same method as the exact same method as you would with the hammer, with the grease-soaked pegwood. There's pivots on this post here, bears onto this here. This needs to fit right down into here like so. Then we have two springs to fit. Now we need a small amount of lubrication. You can use either D5 or grease on this post here. Excuse me while I need to get in close to this and just make sure it's in the groove. There we go. That's tricky to see. Apologies if you couldn't see that, but there's a little groove underneath this eccentric screw. This little puppy hooks over there like so. Oops. And, excuse me again, I'm going to have to just come off screen because it's now impossible to see while I'm trying to hold that in view. Right, so we're down here close up just to show you the whole setup. Now, I'm not going to tell you this is easy because this bit is fiddly. It's awkward, and trying to get everything in place and hold it in place without something pinging off and going somewhere you don't want it to, it's awkward. It's awkward and it's fiddly and it's a bloody nuisance. And it can be frustrating. So what I'm going to do is just sort of walk you through how this is all set up now it's all in place. Apologies I couldn't show you all of that, but again, as I say, trying to do that from a distance when you're used to working through a loop is really quite tricky. So as you can see, we've got the spring for the brake and the operating lever with the long lever which goes through the back and engages with the chronograph arms. What I'd love is to be able to get a clear cover milled out exactly the same as that cover plate so that you could see how it all operates. That would be fantastic. So here you can see the spring with its adjusting eccentric screw just there, and here you can see the hour recorder wheel and the chronograph heart. There is the hammer with the face of the hammer lubricated, and here is the fork that the hammer slides down so that when you're resetting, the brake is pressing against that wheel. As you press the reset hammer, it slides down this, pulls this lever down in that direction and pulls the hammer away just very, very gently, allowing the face of the hammer to hit the heart of the chronograph wheel and reset it to 0. And then as you release it, it goes back up. This allows the pressure to release and moves this back up here and allows the brake to whack back onto the wheel and hold it all in place. Simple. Down here is the large post here which the spring bears against, the face of the spring. This is the one, if you watched the UFO video, this is the one that was broken, this spring at the bottom. And here you can see this spring which hooks between all three of these and maintains the tension. So the face of this is on here. This particular spring here sits behind the reset pusher, which, if I move that in, you can see how that bears against that. That in turn pushes this face onto here, pushes the reset hammer down, and so on, as I've explained. So yeah, it's tricky to kind of explain it and to visualize it, and it would be really, really nice if I could get a clear cover. If I press any of those buttons right now, the whole thing's just going to all over the place, and all you're going to see is an explosion of parts and possibly hear some swear words from me. So we don't want to do that. So we're going to get the cover plate on now, making sure that we've got everything we need on this side. So we've got the train of wheels for the dial side. We've got the intermediate wheel for the calendar works, that must be on first. We've got all the chronograph parts, we've got all the keyless parts, and we've got the quick day date change. Next thing we need to do is drop this plate on, and we need to drop this on as precisely as we possibly can to make sure that it doesn't knock anything out of the way and undo all that nice hard work that we've done in aligning everything. Now this is a little bit tricky because the hour wheel has a small hole for the pinion to go through. The minute recorder has a jewel for it to go through. We've then got to get it over this bit and then the alignment pins as well. So this can be a little bit tricky, but with a little bit of practice, something you get used to. And the trick I find, the thing that works for me, I hope you can see this and my head's not obscuring it, but the thing that works for me is to go for the center and the minute recorder hand first. Sometimes, if you're really, really lucky, like there, it almost drops right in place for you. You're going to be nice. Oh, look at that. Sometimes it does that for you, and quite literally drops straight into place. Sometimes it doesn't. sometimes it causes you to say rude words. But sometimes it does that, and when it does, you have to say thank you. You have to give thanks to the gods of watchmaking, wherever they may be and whoever they may be. Our Saint Patek Philippe and so on. And then we go ahead and screw this plate into place. So I'll be back in a second once that's screwed into place. We're now at this point. We've got this on. We've got the 3 securing screws in place. You'll notice this is the part that came out, this locating pin here. 3 securing screws are in place. The plate is fastened down firmly. Obviously you check as you're tightening it down that you're not, that it doesn't feel, there's no gaps and it doesn't feel like it's compressing or bending anywhere. That way you know that nothing's out of place. The next bit is the calendar works, but we're not going to do that immediately because there's a couple of other bits to check and address first. First of all, we need to lubricate the hour recording pivot here. Again, tiny drop of D5 for myself. You could use a little bit of 9010, really doesn't matter. Very slow moving, minimal wear, and it's metal. Little bit of 9010 on the minute recorder down here. Ordinarily with a chronograph you would not lubricate the pivots of the minute recording wheel. On a Swiss chronograph you're always taught, or I was always taught, that you lubricate the chronograph runner with 9010, or obviously the equivalent of, but you never lubricate the minute recorder, which is typically jeweled, and obviously it's only clicking a very small fraction every minute. But because these are running constantly to ensure that you don't wear the spring down, the default running position for a Seiko chronograph is constantly running. And it's better to keep them constantly running and then stop and reset them when you want to use them and then start them. But when not in use for timing, keep it running all the time because that saves wear on the vertical clutch spring. Whereas if you leave it stopped all the time, it's compressing that spring and it weakens the spring. And then it's a new chronograph runner to fix that problem if the spring is weakened. So a little bit of D5 on the barrel arbor, tiny spot of D5 on here, 9010 on here. And then before you go any further, check the operation of the chronograph. Make sure the stop, start and reset work as they should. The reason for this is you can get this pin aligned, so this is a bit of a warning and something to check. You can misalign this pin up here, and if it's misaligned and it's on the wrong side of the clutch fingers, the trying to press this, you will bend something and damage something. So if you press the start stop, now it should click really easily, just like that, with very minimal effort, as you can see. If it doesn't click with minimal effort, then something's misaligned. I'll show you that in a moment, and I'll show you how to correct that. There are 2 ways. You can either take this front off and go through the whole procedure again, or you can just take the chronograph bridge off the back. You could always, of course, assemble the front first and then assemble the top with the train and so on. It's entirely up to you, but this is the way that I've always done these, I guess. So if you can see down here, just before we go on to the top, and I'll show you that, but you can see your stop lever there, and you can see how that additionally pushes this lever, which pushes this lever, which pushes the heart, the hammer down onto the heart here. And obviously at the moment that's in the run position, so pressing that won't do anything at all. It's just going to move. So if we put that into the stop position, and if you watch this, you'll see this move up here, and then you'll also see the wheel spin round there as the hammer resets the heart on that. Now obviously it's all very quick, but hopefully you kind of saw enough of that to figure out what was going on. So popping that out of the movement holder, being very careful of the pivots on the front there just now, and we'll look at the top side, the movement, and you can see on this side when you actuate the chronograph buttons, you can see the clutch fingers pop in and out much more easily. So that's the run position, that's the stop position. And if we look just down here, obviously we've not fitted yet the pallets and the balance, which we can now fit. After we've oiled the front, we need to oil the chrono bridge as well, but don't oil that prior to fitting the front, just in case you have to remove this, because down here, hopefully you'll be able to see this nice and clearly. I don't know how visible it's going to be, but hopefully you'll be able to see it. Down here you can just see there, that pin sticking through. That is from that lever on the front, and that sits against your clutch finger, which hopefully you can see. Hopefully you can see move just there, in and out, and that, hopefully you can see it moves that pin as well, and allows it to lock and unlock the hour recording wheel. So while that may not be the clearest, with a bit of luck you'll have been able to see that clear enough to get an inkling of how that works. Next thing to do is the calendar works. After we've lubricated this, I'm not going to show you the building of that because that is pretty much of a muchness. It's much the same as any 6XXX series Seiko, in the sense that you've got your day wheel jumper, which holds down here. You've got your date jumper, which fits onto here. You've got the calendar works, which fit onto here, and so on. It's really straightforward and self-explanatory. And obviously, if you're not sure of any of that, you could just have a look at the disassembly procedure to see which bits go where. I'm going to go ahead and oil these now. And now we've got all this together and we've got the lower barrel arbor jewel, we can fit the pallets, oil those, and then fit the balance and get this thing ticking. So we're now here with the movement completed, all the pivots lubricated, balance refitted. There's a little bit of play on the balance, and there is some wear elsewhere in the movement, but all things considered, it's chugging along quite nicely. And if we take a look, shaky cam footage, apologies for that. Let's zoom in onto the time grapher. And you can see that we are currently 220s, it's been up at 230 on the amplitude, and reasonable. I've just turned the ticker off there to stop that being annoying. This is dial up. This is pendant down. We've got quite a more noticeable deviation pendant right, as you'll see there, which is a little bit of a nuisance, but it could be worse. And then pendant up, it evens out again, and pendant left similarly. So overall, considering the little bit of wear, that's back to dial down just now, considering the little bit of wear around and about, the bit of a wobble and excess end shake on the balance, it's not too bad. Oh, let's zoom back out. It's not too bad. I'm quite pleased with that. It's cleaned up nicely. I was concerned about a few things. It turned out that I expected to find badly worn teeth in the winding mechanism. Now, as it turns out, they are a little bit notchy still, but 100 times better than it was originally, and it is actually winding now. It's actually turning the ratchet wheel, and it's winding the mainspring barrel as it should. Now, what I need to do next is pop the calendar works on, dial and hands back on, and get the whole thing cased back up. And here we are with the completed watch back together with its fishbone bracelet. Lots of scuffs, scratches and wear and that kind of thing, but I'm not bothered about that. You know, that tells a little bit of a story about the history of the watch, and obviously it could be polished up, but I'd be more inclined to just get an aftermarket bracelet, honestly. But the bezel's also a little bit scuffed and worn, as you can see, and obviously there were the marks on the subdials as mentioned during the strip down. The case is quite nice though, so you know, all in all, I'm really pleased with that. Considering that I expected to find some very worn out parts, some much more worn out parts, I was really not happy about the state of the whatever washing solution it was that had been used. But what can you do? You know, it's one of those things, and at least it was relatively clean inside. The only part that I had to replace was the screw on the automatic winding bridge, which was the one of them had been replaced by the wrong type. Everything else was not too bad, but balance a little bit worn, and obviously it's still currently in the running in period. But what's left, ordinarily what I would do now is leave that to run overnight, double check the amplitudes in all the positions and positional errors and that kind of thing, and then it would go onto the winding machine for a few days to see how it fared. But in this case it's going onto the other winding machine. It's going on my wrist. It's going to be worn for a few days, well, certainly tomorrow, and we'll see, and then maybe onto the winding machine, but we'll see. It's going to be worn for a little bit, and we'll see how it performs, and then do any tweaking that's necessary. So that's the Seiko Kakume 61380030. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you for watching. I know this was a long one. We're here the next day. It's not quite 24 hours, but I have been wearing the Kakume today. Been wearing it all day, and chronograph running as I always do with the Seikos. Let's have a look to see what it's doing. And we've got a bit of a step up in the amplitude as everything's bedded back in. Moving it to dial down. Pendant down. Pendant right. Which has evened itself out a little bit, which is nice. Pendant left. Sorry, try and get that glare off the screen so you can see what's going on. And pendant up. So a little bit of positional variation, as you can see, but all in all, I think that's settled in quite nicely, given how gummy the internals of this particular movement were, how caked up with everything. And we've just got a bit of a jump in the amplitude there, but that will settle itself back down again. So all in all, I'm really quite pleased with how this is chugging along. It's been telling the time nicely all day and has remained quite nicely accurate. So yeah, delighted with that, considering how sort of gummy and messy the internals were. There were a couple of areas with wear. There was some scoring on the mainspring barrel drive cog, which drives the hour recorder wheel, so I was a little bit worried about that hanging up, and I made sure to leave that to run for a full 12-hour cycle to see if it went all the way around and kept time okay, which it did, so I was pleased to see. So yes, all in all, very, very pleased with this. Very pleased indeed that it's come out so well. It's a shame about the marks on the subdials, but I'm quite happy with the whole thing. That wraps up this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next one.